Hey everyone, it's Mikki here. You're listening to Wikipedia, and if you are picking this up on Wednesday, Merry Christmas. I hope you're having a fantastic day. This week on the podcast, I speak to Holly Baxter. She's a registered dietitian, an Aussie import into the US. She's an author, scientific educator, and nutrition coach, and we discuss transformation. So we talk initially about Holly's journey from a young track athlete to physique competitor, how she overcame her eating disorder in amongst all this, and how discovering her faith has helped for an inner transformation to become a happier and more content version of herself. In amongst all of this, Holly and I also discuss some real practical strategies for people interested in the fat loss space. So I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. Holly is a wealth of information. She just has such a beautiful personality and she's so giving. And anyone that follows Holly on social media and follows her YouTube channel will absolutely know this as well. For those who don't know Holly, her true passion lies in women's health and fitness. As an accredited practicing dietitian and online physique coach, she brings her discipline and first-hand experience as a professional athlete to empower clients to achieve their ultimate success through knowledge and dedication. Her commitment to providing evidence-based education continues to be the cornerstone of her career, challenging misconceptions about food, nutrition, and exercise. Her mission has always been to promote accurate information and inspire a life of balance and wellness. Holly leads the journey to a healthier, more informed and empowered life through her revolutionary Bare Body, team-based fitness and coaching business. So Holly not only has a thriving online coaching business, she also, with a team of a few other people, puts out a research review every month called Bare Brain as well. So there are so many avenues with which you can engage with Holly and her information. So I've put down links in the show notes to both Bare Body and also Holly's Instagram page. Absolutely check it out if you're not already following her. Before we crack on into the interview though, I would like to remind you that the best way to support this podcast is to hit the subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening platform, because that increases the visibility out there and amongst literally thousands of other podcasts. And that way, more people will get to learn from the guests that I have on this show, including, of course, Holly Baxter. All right, team, enjoy the conversation. I say things have calmed down, but to be honest, every time, and I'll just hit record, every time because I follow you weekly on YouTube, obviously, and it's like every time you're like, oh, well, it's just been such a busy week, like this is a new thing for you. But I'm like, Holly, every single week is busy for you, and you're very good at filling space, or at least it seems, which isn't a bad thing, right?
Yeah, I feel like life has been a bit of a roller coaster since I got off the plane and stepped foot in the US. So I probably should. Well, to be fair, I have gotten much better at just normalizing chaos, which I don't know is a good thing or not, but at least it's helped me to navigate some pretty difficult situations by just being like, yep, another busy week. It's kind of crazy.
But you just roll with it. And
you have to.
Do you know?
Yeah,
and like, do you follow Dr. Gabrielle Lyon at all?
I do. I know Gabrielle, yes.
Yeah, of course you would, yes. And she often talks about this, the concept that we talk about stress like it's always a bad thing, but actually stress is just a really good way to build resilience. And I have to say, Holly, I think you must have, over the several years that I've followed you, have just built a lot of resistance to be doing what you're doing now, and you really appear to be thriving. And I feel like you are very good at sort of wearing your heart on your sleeve, actually. So it would be a difficult facade to keep up if it wasn't actually genuine.
No, it's definitely genuine. I think You have to roll with the punches. I think, learning to forgive, for all the negative things and the people that kind of come in and out of your life, I think has been monumental in like being able to kind of just continue to persevere. But, I used to struggle with depression and through lots of therapy, like I have been able to kind of work through that. And I think I just have a very different mindset today. Substantially different to how I was maybe 10 years ago. I didn't handle stress, change, disruption. I joke, I always say I had the emotional intelligence and capabilities of a toddler until I started doing therapy. So I'm sure we'll get into some of that in today's podcast. I talk a little bit about my upbringing and I guess what kind of contributed to my eating disorder and just some of the stuff that's going on, but definitely a different person now. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. When I popped on my stories that I was talking to you, I got loads of people saying how excited they were that I would get the opportunity. And in fact, one woman who I know, she was an ex-client of yours actually, and she's like, I worked with Holly in 2020, and Holly is amazing, and she really got me sort of set up for her physique competition. So, so you're very well liked over this side of the world as well, which of course is where you're from, right? You're Australian. You immigrated to the US.
I grew up in Tasmania.
Yeah, Tasmania. I hear it's amazing over there, Holly. Like beautiful and outdoorsy. Possibly, I don't know. It's probably quite different now, maybe than to when you grew up. So how did you end up in the US?
Yeah, so I guess to kind of go back a little bit, obviously I was born and raised in Tasmania, which is one of the smallest places, I guess, ever. It is the smallest state in Australia. I kind of got out of there as quick as I could to go and do my undergraduate and master's degree. And then I kind of moved around a couple of different locations while I was there. And then originally when I moved to the US, it was for a boy. So that was kind of what drew me over initially, but I've kind of got my life here now, all my businesses, new family and friends, and as much as I'd love to be able to go back, I obviously miss family, miss friends, miss the natural beauty, and there are so many amazing things about Australia, but it's such a big adjustment. It was a massive adjustment, back then, and it would be just as difficult, I think, now if I decided to go back. But maybe one day we will. I don't know. I'm kind of in a position now where I am dating somebody new. I obviously was married, divorced, and I'm in a new relationship, and they are very fixed in the US. They are, I guess, an assistant professor at a university here, which, it's a lot more challenging to move around when you've got a physical in-person job than perhaps what I do, which is mostly online. So I could live anywhere, which is nice. But for now, I don't see myself leaving Florida, at least. I love it here. It's great, despite the hurricanes.
Nice. Yeah. No, that's nice. I was in Florida, maybe in May last year, and you have like quite a few breweries, and I'm pretty sure that, well, at least I'm pretty sure you were a beer drinker or you quite enjoy a craft beer, and there are so many in Florida, and in fact, America is known for its craft brewery scene. So I'm pretty lucky. So, Holly, obviously you're an accomplished athlete as well, and you sort of started out in, was it athletics and track, I think, and then you sort of moved into physique sport, and I'm not sure if that was like a linear sort of, that is how it went, but how did that, I mean, you've been really open about your eating disorder, which of course you just mentioned before, and there are a range of different sort of podcast that you talk about it in. What does recovery look like for you now? Because as I understand it, it's actually only been in the last few years that you really felt like you've gotten to a place where it's resolved. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Yeah, I've been very open about it. I think it's been, part of the healing journey has been, part of being open and being vulnerable and kind of sharing some of those struggles. And I think where it gained most of its attention was probably on the Peter Attia podcast. Honestly, we received so much like overwhelming support after that podcast. I remember reading through the comment section on YouTube where that video is, and I could not believe the number of women that were like, thank you so much for sharing. I've struggled with this myself. I've had, mental health struggles over the years. I've struggled with disordered eating or an eating disorder. And it's just so refreshing to have somebody just so openly talk about it. And I think, I now can look back and reflect on, my experience and, so much of the reason why I didn't heal sooner, I didn't take action sooner, was because, people are very private about those struggles. And I think it comes from a fear of being judged or criticized or misunderstood. And, the old me was that person. That's exactly who I used to be. And being vulnerable was so intimidating, and especially since my career kind of went from being, private practice straight over to social media when I moved to the US. And you're constantly in the public eye. So I think there is an even greater pressure to kind of maintain this like certain standard or image. But, I think when we reveal those struggles, for me at least, there was a genuine concern that it might negatively affect my like professional reputation. And for me, maybe what was even worse than the idea of affecting my professional reputation was feeling like or having this perception of weakness. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this later in the podcast, but, the way that I was raised, that would be unacceptable. And I also think just culturally, we pride ourselves on having strength and having resilience. And, I think for so many years, I felt that if I admitted any of those, I would be perceived as weak. So, yeah, I think there was a lot of shame in that. I kept completely silent for all of my late teens, all of my early 20s. And it was really probably when I was about 26 years old, I was kind of at the breaking point where like my mental health was so bad. And I was just I was struggling in every sense of the word, that I finally, started to get some help. But it didn't happen immediately. I didn't click with the therapist that I was working with. I went to another one. I was like, what a loon. It took a little bit of time to kind of find somebody that I felt like I could genuinely be open and honest about it. But up until that point, I kind of internalized everything. So any problems I had, I would just bottle them all up. And instead of reaching out for support, I just pushed it all down. And, that was, again, a reflection of how I was raised. But, I can look at this now and realize, like, not only did I delay my healing journey, I completely ignored all these opportunities to grow, to mature, to work on self-development. So, as soon as I finally did, put myself in the pathway of like receiving support and help, and kind of letting go of my, pride, I guess, because that's what it felt like, I really started to see some pretty major improvements, to be honest.
Yeah. And what kind of timeline is this, Holly? Like, so if you sort of started looking at it when you were 26, like, and where were you at on the social media front there? Like, and how did that sort of transpire?
Yeah. So I guess when I was, so I'm 35 now, to put things in perspective. I moved to the US in 2017 and I was probably 27, I guess. Someone can do the math for us. But it was around that same time. So 26, 27, I'd started working with a therapist in Australia, but very inconsistently. I wasn't committed. I honestly thought I was a lost cause at that point. When I first came to the US, I actually started working with Dr. Corey Probst. Some of you may or may not know who she is. And we worked together for probably 6 months. But again, she's a wonderful person. But trying to make sure that you've got a good connection is really important. And I think from a professional perspective, because we were in the same industry or area, I know for me, I just didn't feel like I was able to open up and, talk about things freely, because there was also like a relationship, outside of that with my husband at the time. And, there was professional connections all over the place. So it just didn't feel like a good fit. So I didn't get therapy for maybe another year. So we're moving into like 2018 at this point. And then I finally found somebody who was incredible. And I'd also been doing a lot of, self-development. I was reading books, I was listening to audibles, like so many things to kind of get me, moving in the right direction. So yeah, timeline was 26 to 35, and still to this day, I still have a therapist. I still have the same therapist, though I see her a lot less because I just feel like, I am in such a better place. And I've also now got, the big guy, like God is in my life very, heavily. And it's just made such a big difference on my ability to kind of navigate difficulties. It's like wisdom, scripture, like all of that has made such a massive impact, on my recovery journey. And I'm sure we can dive into all of this.
Yeah. And I find it so, like, it must be so challenging to know when to sort of open up to the wider audience, like no one out there on social media thinks that no one is like, oh, Holly needs to share everything of her life on social media. Yet we know that in order to sort of garner, I guess, trust of your audience, it is a really good thing to be genuine, which you are so good at. Like, was it...
And transparency.
Yeah. Was it frightening for you, Holly, initially to chat about your eating disorder online, and then, of course, these other transformations that have occurred?
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, I don't think anybody likes to admit, that they're a flawed human. Again, I had so much shame, and I really want to talk a little bit about, why I carried so much shame, just relating that back to my upbringing. But yeah, to begin with, I didn't talk about it. I just bruised right street. I just brushed straight over that. I didn't talk about it at all. But I kind of realized, after starting to go to, therapy, and I just felt a little bit more confident in being a bit more emotionally vulnerable. I found my words, so to speak. I just felt a little bit better, in conveying like some of the struggles that I had. And I think to begin with early on, I would only let little bits out here and there. I mean, I go back to my YouTube channel in 2017 and 2018. I'm like, oh, cringe. But, that was part of this process. And, I don't know. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing. What would have happened if I didn't step into social media where, I kind of had to talk about things openly, or at least that was part of the process in coaching from a nutrition perspective and training. I also had to kind of talk about, well, why didn't things work this week, or why they did work very successfully, what was changing. So there's so much psychology that kind of goes into this. And I think, over the years of being a coach, education and knowledge around nutrition and exercise is critical, as you know. But what I was finding is, I could convey what I needed to from a scientific perspective relatively confidently and with simplicity. But it was always the psychology and the, behavior change and the mindset shift and like reframing people's, entire beliefs, that they've carried with them for their entire lives. Like that was the really difficult part. So I think I realized, if I'm going to embrace this, I also need to do this for myself. So, that was kind of the impetus or the catalyst for, being more vulnerable. And it has really made me a better coach. Like I think about, 5 years ago, even how I coached, and the way that I go about it is very, very different. But to think about like where it all stemmed from, honestly, like I don't think I ever thought about where the eating disorder actually came from. And after having done a lot of therapy, it's actually very clear. But as I understand it, I think I was raised in what I would consider a rather narcissistic household. So I guess to give some examples, because I think people might be able to relate to this a little better, love was very conditional, was very transactional. And I don't think that should be the case for any child or anyone for that matter. But love was given based on your performance and for your achievements and whether or not you behaved the right way. I remember very distinctly, like appearances were everything. And there were no room for mistakes or any errors. And it felt like no matter what you did, nothing was ever good enough. So, home for me, and I love my parents, like they're your parents. But it never ever felt like a safe space where you could be honest about your feelings. And, if you were, at least how I remember it, there were always consequences. If you told the truth, if you didn't, it didn't matter. So as a result, I think when I grew up, I kind of learned to just suppress my emotions. I would never really say what I needed. I constantly had my guard up, and I think some of that I look at with positive, like with a positive lens. I think that helped me to develop the resilience that I have today, and tolerance for pretty difficult and uncomfortable things. But unfortunately, the downside of like being raised that way, I consider myself one of the world's, or did consider myself one of the world's best people pleasers, because, I learned growing up that that's how I would receive praise. That's how I got validation. If I did really well, I would be, awarded for that. I would be given attention or affection or love. So yeah, I think as an adult then, that kind of was what led me to set the standards for myself unbelievably high, like unrealistically high. It was silly. I mean, I still hold myself to a high standard, but I have other like redeeming qualities now that I have worked on a lot, that kind of help me to, know when to put the gas pedal on or put the brake on certain characteristics and qualities that I have. But back then I prided myself with like perfectionist mindset. I was so proud that that's how I was, and that I was so, what's a good word to describe this? Like I was so not hard-headed, but resilience, I guess, is the best word. So yeah, I think the reason that I wanted to share a little bit about my background is because it's those experiences like in our early childhood that I think really shape who we become as an adult. And I was a complete mess. Like I said to you just earlier, maybe it was off air, I don't know. But I feel like back then, like I had the emotional coping skills of a toddler. I treated myself like a drill sergeant. Then, I could never make mistakes. I never gave myself any grace or compassion. And ultimately, the eating disorder it was a symptom of trauma as a kid. And I was also sexually assaulted when I was a teenager, and I, talked about this pretty openly. So there were like a combination of different things going on, as a young girl and then as a teenager that ultimately, led me to you've got an eating disorder. It was the only thing at the time where I felt like I had control, because everything else felt completely out of control, or the standards were so high, the bar was so high. I'm getting like no emotional affection. I don't know how to manage my emotions. It was just wild. So I feel like I really struggled as a young woman, and I'm so glad that I finally kind of let myself ask for help, and get some support, because it has only been beneficial onwards and upwards ever since then.
Oh, 100%, Holly. And it's hard. It's hard to hear people talk about this kind of trauma and experience, because you just feel so deeply for them, and what how hard that must have been for you. Have you like had conversations with people in your past about this now? Like, is it a hard thing for you to sort of talk about in relation to the people that really impacted on your upbringing? I'm not sure if I said that correctly. You know what I mean?
I think I understand what you're trying to say. I wouldn't say that I have held a close relationship with my family. I think, honestly, if I'm being really like open about it, part of the struggle is just like having a lot of distance between us. The time zone for Australia to the US is really difficult. But again, I think having done so much therapy, and working with people that I respect and that I know really have my best interests at heart, I think I've kept that little bit of distance for a reason. It's a protective thing. I don't want to be in a position ever again where, I feel like that, or I am, mistreated. And, as an adult now, I think I have better coping skills, and I'm able to kind of manage it a whole lot better. So I don't know whether that was exactly what you're asking, but
no, actually, that was pretty much answered my question around that. And Holly, what I've also, of course, what you've been really open about is your spiritual transformation. And I don't even know if it is a transformation or if it's just something that has just sort of come out. But did you grow up in a religious sort of household? Is it something that you've found as an adult How was it? How did that transpire?
Yeah, it seems like such a blur, but it's been so amazing. Yeah, so you're right. I actually was raised in an agnostic household. So I guess for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically there is no religion. So I didn't have any religious foundations, and not a single person like growing up was Christian or any other religion for that matter. I think in Australia in general, at least in Tasmania where I grew up, there was not a whole lot of diversity in general. So, I didn't have that experience or even any spiritual guidance, to call upon for any help if I needed it. So I think, a lot of the struggle, at least with my identity, as a young girl, is probably attributable to that kind of upbringing. I think my family adhered to probably social norms and ideals. And, I think that probably what that means is I think they were basing a lot of their value systems on superficial things like appearances, achievements, material possessions, stuff, like things that now what I realize are very low on the totem pole, having, found faith and I was recently baptized. Actually, I flew to Texas with to see one of my friends who was, I guess, she's already been baptized, but she was renewing her faith, I guess, and wanted to do it together. So, it's really changed my perspective on so many things. I don't feel like the same person, and in a good way. Like I'm just happier. Like the world could be burning down around me and I probably will still feel pretty good, which is a very different, scenario or version of me compared to, the 18, 20 something year old version of myself.
Holly, did you have people around you that encouraged you with this, or was it just something that you stumbled upon? And I'm always really curious about this.
Yeah, so honestly, I think my introduction to like church in general, it's a little bit bittersweet because the person or the individual that actually introduced me to my local church here in Tampa, unfortunately has hurt me personally in unimaginable ways. But I have forgiven this person and I think I've come to terms with those memories. And I really had to recognize that this is probably a testament to the unconventional ways in which God operates. He found a way to be with me, regardless of the circumstances. So, yeah, I think I was in a really difficult place in my marriage. I had basically, I didn't know what else to do. I was going to church to begin with, praying to God that my marriage would somehow miraculously heal, that I just needed the strength to get through because I was doing therapy for myself. I was in therapy, for like marriage counseling. We'd been through like 7 counselors. Unfortunately, none of them were spiritual based. And nothing was changing. So I originally was going to church, just praying that something could happen that was good. And whilst it obviously hasn't worked out, it's been one of the best decisions in my entire life. So it's changed many things. I think even down to the way that I coach people. It's just given me, I guess, more empathy for people. I feel like I'm a more like compassionate, grace-giving individual. I feel like I have a set of guiding principles now that help, govern my behavior and my decision making. Like, I could probably do a whole podcast just talking about that. But it is relatively new. And I mean, I recall not that long ago, maybe just 1.5, 2 years ago, just saying God, or like singing some of the songs, at the beginning of a church service before the sermon. It just felt so uncomfortable and strange. It was like, an out of body experience. But it's a very different feeling now. It's very comforting and I think it's given me hope during periods of my life and still to this day, difficult circumstances.
It's a really obvious transformation actually when or at least when I see you on social media, like you just seem so much lighter. and despite the busyness and despite all the crazy things that are going on. And I think I saw your, all the moving and restructuring your business and just all of the things. You just, I don't know, there's a lightness about you, Holly, which I don't know that was there before. And it was from a person who follows you, it's a real delight to see, someone going through a really hard time and then sort of coming out and being better and being, stronger and just, for it. So I'm sure all of your followers would feel the same.
I think they do. I've had many comments about it, and it honestly just makes me smile. I think, it's great. It really is.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, and amongst all of this stuff that has shaped you, you're like this kick-ass dietitian who's an amazing educator, and you are so generous with what you put online. And I just really would love to get some of your sort of technical insights, because I know half the people listening to this will be like, yeah, but what does Holly think about zone 2 training, and do I really need to bulk before I cut, and what are her thoughts around this? So I'd love to talk shop with you.
Absolutely. Fire away. What are we going to chat about?
Well, actually, like one of the first things, Holly, and I heard you talk on Optimum Protein podcast a little bit about sort of building muscle and what that sort of takes. But okay, so I have a beef online when I hear other influencers, and they're not necessarily coaches, they're just sort of influencers, and they're like, a woman, like, you need to earn the right to lose weight. Like, you just can't come up and just decide that you're going to go on a diet and then strip calories and exercise and the rest of it. You have to earn the right. And by earning the right, they mean you have to spend time eating more food, gaining weight, gaining muscle. But I think it's almost the attitude of, you're not deserving of feeling better until you've sort of gone through this sort of building process. Have you seen that? Or you look a little bit surprised by those comments, actually. We must follow different people.
Surprised. I honestly have never, look, I'm the worst person when it comes to knowing what's going on social media. I put my stuff online. I might interact with a couple of comments, and then I am back into the books and reading or whatever. So I'm probably the worst person. If you had asked me, like, what's the latest trends on social media, I couldn't tell you. I don't know. I think I missed the whole plant oils or seed oils or whatever it was. I'm like, oh, is this a thing? But yeah, okay. So earning the right to achieve like a good physique, I don't think we have to earn the right at all. I think that there is a scientific way that makes sense to me if you want to optimize your body composition. And unfortunately, the fastest route to usually getting to where you want to go is I guess the pathway that requires most mental resilience and resistance. So it's sitting with the discomfort potentially of not getting what you want right now, knowing that if you're patient and you give yourself time, that you will achieve your goals. And I'm the first person to put my hand up and said, any shortcut I could have taken as a young 20-something-year-old woman, I would have taken it. I believed that there were magic pills, that there were supplements that were going to, transform my body composition. I think I tried just about every single supplement that would come on the market back in the day. And now that barely even makes up 1% of what I actually do. I don't really even take supplements anymore. But yeah, I think in terms of muscle building, I mean, ultimately, the women that I'm working with, they want to be able to have a lot of food freedom. And what I mean by that, I guess, is they would like to have a lot of calorie flexibility to enjoy not only the healthy nutrition things, but the fun things as well, which is, a reasonable expectation or wish. And they want to have, not only a good looking appearance, but they want to feel good. They want to be strong, and they care about their health, and they want to, exercise all health in all ways. So the fastest way to do that is to just think about building. I mean, there's ultimately the only way to improve your calorie requirements is to increase your lean body mass. That lean body mass is really the driving powerhouse behind what's going to afford your body more calories. It allows you to be more wasteful with, how you spend your energy. So I think, I've said it this way before. build for as long as you possibly can until you've got as much muscle mass as you desire, and then worry about your cutting phase. Because if you decide to do it a different way, and it's not wrong by any stretch of the imagination, but if you do a 8-week cut here or another 12-week cut there, or you end up spending half of the year in a calorie deficit dieting, you're chasing, fat loss. But every single week that you choose to be in a deficit, you're basically tacking on weeks to the time frame that you're actually going to get to your ultimate muscle building goals, because the likeliness of somebody building an appreciable, amount of muscle mass whilst they're dieting is relatively low. And again, there's going to be some variability with that, depending on the person, depending on their body fat percentage. So, if it's somebody that's already relatively lean and they've only got a little bit of, change that they want to make in their muscle mass versus their lean mass, that set of circumstances proves to be, I guess, the most challenging to build muscle in, because we don't have this huge reservoir or storage unit of adipose tissue and energy that's going to help drive and create that new muscle tissue, compared to maybe an individual that has a slightly higher body fat percentage. Maybe they're sitting just above 25%. That's kind of my, draw a line in the sand. If I had to pick a number, 25% and above. For an individual that has that kind of body composition, they've got a little bit more reserves in the tank that would allow you then to build muscle, even if you are, endeavoring to lose body fat, because you've got some storage to kind of help not only fuel the training well, allow you to reach, proximity to failure to help signal muscle growth, but you're also able to lose body fat at the same time. So it kind of does come down to the individual if they're, going to choose one route or the other. But the most direct route is build as long as you possibly can, worry about the fat loss at the end, because every week that you spend in a deficit is just tacking on weeks until you get to your ultimate goal.
Yeah. And people are in such a rush to lose the weight, I think. We're like, patience is a virtue that not a lot of us have when it comes to body composition. It's like, well, I'm on an 8-week plan. So, by week 6, I want to sort of be, notwithstanding or not thinking about the fact that it's actually been, several years of the slow sort of weight gain that they've experienced, and now they're wanting to do something about it. Like it's hard to be patient, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I understand it. I mean, I've been that person, but, it's hindsight's a wonderful thing. I can sit here now having 10, 15 years of being in this industry doing the right thing. But I guess you can go quickly. Of course, there's a certain, limit on how fast one should be losing weight per week. There are several studies that kind of indicate, once you're exceeding this amount of your body weight per week, you're starting to compromise your lean tissue, and thus you're compromising your metabolic rate. Your metabolism is under fire. But, even within the safe recommended reference ranges, I still won't diet in this higher area, because I know the sacrifices that I have to make in order to do that. And it's so unbalanced. So again, it comes down to the individual. Some people have a higher tolerance for uncomfortable positions than others. And it could also be circumstantial. I look at the broad range of clients that I work with. I have one client right now, she has 7 children, 7. And then, I look at the time that she's got free and available, and she also works part-time on the weekend. She's a hairdresser. Her husband, I don't know what her husband does, but anyway, they split those responsibilities. And then I look at, some of my other clients, they're single, they have a very low stress job. Once they finish in the afternoon, they can switch off. There is no other responsibilities. There's no stress. You're on call basically 24/7 as an entrepreneur. And, in that unique set of circumstances, someone might be able to move at a faster speed because they're not having to contend with 5,000 things every day. Their responsibilities are a little bit less. So they might be able to commit, to something that's slightly more aggressive. So, it really comes down to the person. So yeah, there's multiple ways to get to the end road. And I think for many of us, and at least my experience was, I just had an unrealistic expectation of what I could do given my circumstances. And only through years of practice and then growing up a little bit, becoming a little bit wiser, was I like, wow, I was so hard on myself. Like, what on earth was I thinking? Like, I'm not going to be able to do that. You know, you're looking after children, you're trying to run 4 companies, you know, you're doing this without any family in the country. Like, it was just wild. So yeah, I think again, part of my healing journey, there's been a lot of time spent, you know, learning to be a little bit more emotionally vulnerable and learn compassion, learn giving grace, and learning to be less of a perfectionist. And you know, I would never have admitted it back you know then, but it has been so freeing to like let it go a little bit, chill out a little bit. And you know, I'm such a happier person now because you know, I try to do things that are a little bit more realistic. So I think that tends to shine through a little bit with the coaching that I do for women. I'll have some people come in and they're like, all right, well, you know, in the past I've lost weight at this speed. And I'm like, well, that's nice. How'd that go for you? You know, how was your mental health? How was your relationship with your husband? So, you know, it's about striking a good balance, you know, for the individual.
Yeah, nice one. And, you know, is it realistic to expect that if you are currently maintaining your weight at, say, just pick a number, 1,600 calories, that, you know, if you spend a year building muscle, that you're able to increase the number of calories that you eat by a set amount? Like, so what is the math around that, Holly? Like, sometimes I look out on social media and it just seems like either it's a reverse dieting case where this person's gone from 1,200 calories to now they're able to eat 2,100 calories and oh my goodness, look, they've lost weight. Like, what are the expectations in that space? Because I feel like social media is rife with these transformations.
Right. Okay. So I think in terms of like one's capacity to get their calories up, we can achieve that through a couple of different areas. I guess I'll start with the first one, which we probably hear a lot of, which is this kind of positive adaptation. So I guess you're probably familiar with this idea of like the reverse diet. My personal stance on reverse dieting has changed significantly over the years. It's definitely, I used to be far over here and now I'm kind of back in the middle a little bit. So I've softened my belief behind that principle or that process. I do think that there is a hard ceiling for all of us where, you know, beyond a certain point or a certain calorie amount, we're not able to just continuously increase calories, and increase calories. Like there is a ceiling. If we go further beyond that, we then do gain body fat. So, you know, part of the reason that we're able to achieve some adaptation is by and large through your NEAT, so non-exercise activity thermogenesis. So, you know, as we give ourselves a little bit more, you know, energy, we, you know, increase our calorie targets by a small amount. What we'll often find is that, you know, people's NEAT increases. That might exist in the form of maybe you just fidget a little bit more. Maybe you swivel on your chair a little bit more like I do when I'm coaching now. If you're out in a public place, I know from me being in a fat loss phase to me being in a small surplus and eating just a really good amount of calories, rather than me sitting down to talk to people, I will stand up. I might be standing there instead of just being, you know, dead still. I will sway on my feet, or I move around more. Another great example is always the obvious one when you're in a contest prep. I would go to get beverages from my refrigerator so that keep me hydrated through the day. And I had a 2-story, 3-story house actually here in Tampa. And I'd find myself going down to the kitchen, and rather than just getting a single drink, like I'd take a can of soda up to my office, I would be trying to like hoard 3 under my armpits to go back upstairs. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, it's not conscious. This is subconscious. Like your body's trying to conserve energy. So, you know, when we do start to allow more calories back in, and you've got to trust that there is some amount of adaptation available, we can bring our calories up. And, you know, the studies that we have, and there are not that many, believe it or not, would indicate somewhere in the realm of maybe 90 to 120 calories of positive adaptation. There are probably other cases, undocumented cases that we don't have in science, where people have experienced wildly greater adaptation. So we call that like a maintenance calorie range. But it's probably no more than, say, 3 to 5% on average for most people. So that's one part of this, capacity to add more calories. And some people are too afraid to even try. They're just like, oh, I don't want to do it, or there's some kind of limiting belief or fear or worry that they have, but it probably exists. But then, as far as then taking your calories any higher, the only other way that you can do that is if you have a more muscular body. That is a more energy demanding, material that allows you, for the same exercise that you are doing today, you think about your current training program, your step goal, whatever it is. The body that now is more muscular will burn more calories without you doing anything else. Like, it just needs more energy to support that muscle mass. So, you can therefore then diet a little bit easier. If you do the work, build the muscle, then, if you are embarking on further fat loss, or in my case, like I'm always, doing competitions, I'm now able to, lose body fat doing the same, frequency of lifting, the same, 3 sessions a week of cardio. But I do get a little further ahead every time, because now my body just demands more energy, and I do get to eat a little bit more too than what I used to do. So as far as, what's the math behind that? Well, if you are gaining lean tissue, so like protein, it's 4 calories per gram. So, you can do the math. Like, if you've got to put on, I don't know, I don't have a calculator in front of me, but insert whatever amount of muscle you want to put on, that's how many more calories, that mass is going to demand, in a day. So it can be pretty impressive, depending on how much somebody actually puts on.
Yeah, no, I love that, because one of the challenges that I have is to convince a woman to do strength-based training, actually. And I wonder whether you get that, or probably you might actually attract women who are also already doing strength-based training, but maybe not. You probably work with a wide variety of people, but I think it's because I don't even know that they're afraid to get bulky. I think they just really dislike the gym. Or on the flip side, they really love the feeling of doing cardio-based training, because it just feels different in the moment of that. You get the sweat up, your heart rate's higher. And then if they do go into the gym, they're lifting like 5-pound dumbbells, and doing and very easily, and they're not necessarily putting some sort of effort in it. So but how you've just described, the advantage of doing muscle-based or sort of strength-based training, I think hopefully will flick the switch a little bit.
Flip the switch.
In someone's, in someone's mind.
Yeah, and again, this is where I think like nutrition and exercise education is pivotal in all of this. I was that person myself. I mean, I think back to my 18-year-old version of Holly, and I was a cardio bunny like everybody else was. And when you grow up doing sport, usually, like you're in school, you're probably doing something that requires you to run. I ran. I did track sprinting. I loved, as I kind of went on to college, I kind of transitioned out of that a little bit, and was more interested in doing like 5-kilometer runs. We had a beautiful place, in Melbourne, where I lived, that I could go and run. And I, had a gym with my old boyfriend back then, and we ran, we did boot camps, and it was all, functional training. It was get your heart rate up, sweat. And if you weren't sweating, then you weren't working hard enough. So I definitely had that mentality when I kind of moved into the gym setting. But again, it's just education. Once you realize, okay, that type of training, whether you're working zone 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, they all burn calories. Like, all exercise has the potential to burn calories, but not all exercise has the potential to signal muscle growth. So, once we can kind of conceptualize that idea, then when you're lifting, you don't need to be sweating to be, maximally like fatiguing all those motor units within a muscle, which is signaling muscle growth. And it was actually such a relief to me. Recently, there was a meta-analysis that came out that was looking at, I guess, hypertrophy adaptations or muscle growth outcomes under different RPE conditions, so rate of perceived exertion. So looking at like an RPE 7, 8, 9, and 10, and were there statistical differences between muscle growth, whether you train at a 7 or a 10 out of 10. And what was so great to hear was that anywhere in that range, the results are really similar. So my attitude towards exercise was always do or die. So, it kind of gave me, I can go in and actually just enjoy this. Still work relatively hard, 70% out of my maximum up to 100%, and I can still get really good results.
That is amazing, because part of my, so I love going into the gym, and I'm a runner, but I've always loved strength training as well. But I always suspect that I do not work hard enough, or at least up until the last couple of years. But I'm really trying to sort of, work harder when I'm in the gym. So that is great news, what you've just shared with that.
Yeah.
The new research out there, Holly.
Yes.
Because also a lot on social media is the idea that, in order to get to progress or to maintain health, your health, is to lift heavy, actually. Like particularly women of my age and perimenopause and menopause and beyond, like the type of weights that you want to hit is, 3 to 5 reps, do 5 sets, and it's hard, intimidating type work, which is, it's that or go for a run for a lot of women. They're like, I'm just going to go for a run because that's easier, it's less intimidating, and I know what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, for the longest time, obviously I've evolved too, like every woman in the gym, I'm sure. I first kind of transitioned into, hypertrophy-based training. So, with purely the goal of muscle building in mind. And I did that for probably 6 or 7 years without giving any thought to like pure, like true strength training. And I guess by definition, strength training is 1 to 6 rep maximums. So, you're not necessarily going in with anything left in the tank. It's to hit RPE 10, you're going to failure. And, that concept of training for me was very intimidating because, you're dealing with your physical strength. Like it's scary. So I'm really glad that I did, a period, maybe 3 years, where in my non-bodybuilding, like get on stage, be a bikini competitor stage, I would actually switch over and do a bit of powerlifting in my off season. I have done a couple of competitions. I'm by no means very strong. I think I enjoy being athletic and functional. And I think if I was to really test my true limits in that area, I would be so injured. But anyhow, one of the benefits that I do think for anybody who's interested in, or maybe like considering doing strength specific training, is it really does give you a greater bearing on like your true like physical capacity. Like, what are your physical feats? And after doing that, and again, I did it with, all of the precautionary that you need. I had a lifting belt. I used knee sleeves. I used wrist wraps. I did it with catch bars. I was doing it the safest way possible. And that did give me a lot of confidence. I will say the knee sleeves, for anybody that is trying to do squats and hasn't ever used a knee sleeve, oh my God, your joints are just like, it's like music to their ears. But it was really beneficial because it also opened my eyes to, wow, you're not training that hard when you train hypertrophy training. So it encouraged me to push a little bit harder in the area for muscle growth. And that was probably one of the reasons why I wasn't growing. I was just spinning my wheels because truthfully, based on my true strength capacity at the time, I was probably only lifting at an RPE of 5. I was chasing a sweat. I was trying to get my heart rate up, but I wasn't actually getting working my muscle to the point where all those little motor units within the muscle are fully fatigued, which is what signals muscle growth. So I was training outside of that desirable RPE range. So I liked training that way. And I think, it's very fun to go into the gym and challenge yourself and have a performance-based goal. So if you've got an athletic background, I think it's a great pairing. But I also found, because of my competitiveness, I would probably push myself a little bit too hard without the proper recoveries, and I was going way too hard, and I was always sore. My bones ached. It was a different type of sore than I'd ever experienced, and then I was getting injuries. So as much as I love true strength training, for the benefits that it had in terms of me, calibrating my true strength, I wouldn't continue to do it, or at least I do it a lot less often now, at least in that rep range, because I value being able to walk and move free of pain and discomfort. And, I want to be in this for a long time. We know the benefits of strength training and resistance training in terms of like longevity and, staying muscularly strong, functional, having good mobility, stretching, lengthening. So I truly believe that there is a nice balanced trajectory where we can kind of keep cruising along pretty injury free, getting a little bit stronger, growing a little bit of muscle without the big extremes, where you're, oh, I worked so hard that I'm now injured and I'm out for 12 weeks. Or, same in dieting. Like I don't do things in extremes anymore, because usually anything done in that level of extreme, either end of the spectrum, it comes with sacrifice or some kind of consequence. So I do a little bit of that type of training now, but mostly hypertrophy specific. So, 8+ reps, again, working in that RPE range of 7 to 10. And just picking the muscle groups that I really care about.
Yeah, nice one. And I've done a couple of your programs, Holly, and they're always fun because they're often glute and shoulders. And I'm like, well, this is good, because as a runner, you just don't have any glutes. So it's quite fun to train every once in a while.
I discovered that after running for many years.
Now, when it comes to, obviously, protein is a big buzzword. And I mean, you've been in the trenches for so long, even though you're not on social media so much, you must see it, just how the conversation has moved somewhat from just carbs. Is it carbs? Is it fat? Or, do we really need to sort of focus on protein? How have your views changed, if they have, Holly, over the last few years, on the amount of protein we need to improve our physique and then just maintain that improvement? Like, what are the things you think about when you're dialing in protein for a client?
Yeah, again, so my ideas and beliefs have changed. I think they've evolved as the science has evolved. So in terms of the optimal protein reference range, there are two common ways that we hear it referred to, or the recommendations. One of those recommendations is just based on total body weight, and that number, for example, is about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of total body weight. Now, for me, as somebody that is, I think, 63 kilograms, I operate in pounds now. It's so weird going back from Australia to the US. But anyway, I think I'm about 63 kilos. So, at that number, I would need about 97 grams of protein, maybe 103. I might be getting my wires crossed here, but it's not that high. So my preference when it comes to prescribing a protein intake is actually based on somebody's known lean body mass, because it is that lean tissue, that fat-free mass, that really garners why we have a need for protein. So I use the reference range of 1.8 to 2.9, so a pretty big range of protein per kilogram of lean body mass, and anywhere in that range is pretty good. So it gives people flexibility. And again, I used to hold myself to this idea that, more is better. And again, prior to maybe 2015, the research wasn't necessarily clear on that. So I was like, well, it can't hurt me if I eat more. So, I'd always stick to the upper end of that reference range. But I also realized that doing that, whilst it didn't have any detrimental effects to my body composition, and obviously I'm healthy, I don't have any pre-existing kidney disease or anything like that, and I'm not old, I'm still relatively young. So I wasn't concerned about it. But it was actually contributing to my, disordered eating behaviors. It was really skewing the ratio of my meals. So, because my protein target was so high, I didn't really feel like I had a whole lot of flexibility with carbohydrate and fat. And I mean, I loved carbohydrate and fats. So I felt very deprived and very restricted, and it just kept the ball rolling with my ED. So recently, I actually have brought it down by quite amount. Like I'm talking like 40 grams less than what I used to try and shoot for. And, you know, I have not lost anything. In fact, I've still gained muscle in a couple of the muscle groups I've really been trying to grow for competition. So that's kind of been my experience and also what the recommendations would indicate. For older clients and people that are over the age of 40, I know it's not really that old, but I mean, that's the recommendations over the age of 40. I'm almost old myself now, I guess. But I do think there's probably benefits just knowing that, you know, there is increased muscle sarcopenia. You know, as we age, we're not able to get the same kind of signaling to grow our muscles. It's somewhat blunted with aging. So for clients over the age of 40, I kind of encourage them to stay in the upper third of their range, but not to the detriment of their mental health or physical health. I mean, if it's contributing to, you know, stress in their lifestyle because they're really struggling to eat that way, like it's really stressful, you know, or it's causing disordered eating behaviors or a dysfunctional relationship with food, I would say to them, bring it down, like stay in the range then. That's better than nothing. And sometimes there's science and what it says is perfect and optimal. And then there's the human. So, you know, we have to kind of give a little bit of flexibility to that.
Yeah, nice one. And I love how balanced you are on your approach to nutrition as you show on your YouTube clips and of course on social media and like you love eating out, or you appear to love eating out, and you enjoy a drink and the rest of it, which I also enjoy a drink in a responsible sort of way. But I think what you do a really great job of, Holly, is showing that you can be balanced and you don't have to give up your life for your physique related goals. And I think that's something that lots of people appreciate.
Yeah, I really try to practice what I preach. Again, which is exactly why things have changed so much over the years. You know, I previously, and I mean, obviously, you probably know I was involved in the creation of a nutrition coaching app in 2018. And I am in the process now of building, as I've kind of stepped away or I'm navigating, I guess, stepping out of that company and into my own. I don't always track macros anymore. I mean, it was a wonderful skill to have learned, and I did it for about 15 years. And I would encourage anybody who hasn't done flexible dieting and used, you know, macro-based, nutrition approaches to give it a try, because it's so informative. It helps. It's a process of education, really, like learning the constituents of the foods that you like, and then how can you fit them into your diet. I look at it like a budget. You know, it's okay, if my body requires, or I have this much money in the bank, all right, how much do I want to give to that meal? How much do I want to have, you know, at this dinner? And I just think it gives people, you know, a bit more like a relative it just makes sense. So, but in my off season, I don't track macros anymore. Again, just for a whole host of different reasons. It's not that I am, you know, poo-pooing flexible dieting. I still work with many clients on flexible dieting. I'd say 50% of my clients are tracking macros, but you've got to look at the individual, assess certain risks. You know, I think from a disordered eating background, like I would never put somebody, now knowing what I know and the education and research that exists in that space, it's not a place that I would want to encourage somebody to go. So, you know, for ethical reasons, I can't, knowingly prescribe, you know, macros to somebody that, is struggling with an eating disorder. So, you know, an intuitive and mindful eating approach, which is what I do now when I'm not, getting on stage, is probably a really good, a good strategy. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I will. I really I came from a background of not really using macros at all in my nutrition practice until a few years ago. And the way I feel it can be really helpful for people is that you stop catastrophizing over certain decisions. You know, like if you have 3 hot chips from a plate, you're not like, oh my God, I've just blown my whole calorie budget. You know, because even though you're not necessarily counting, in your head, you're sort of running some sort of mental tally regardless. And it's not until you actually see things on paper, you're like, actually, I can fit that in and still live my life and meet my goals. And I feel like people are really afraid to, it's almost like they feel it's confrontational to actually have a look at what they do. So they are almost in denial about tracking and about sort of taking account, I suppose, of what they eat. But I mean, when you get real and you start looking, and it's not a forever thing, right? It's such a good learning tool.
Yeah, I will say, I mean, I totally agree with you there. It shouldn't be a forever thing, though I've had several clients kind of say to me over the years, it doesn't give me any stress. I don't feel like this is detracting from my life in any way. And I mean, I have to take them for face value. I mean, if it's truly not a burden at all, and they have the bandwidth to track, and they really enjoy it, that's fine. I think when it's a fear of letting go of tracking because they don't know whether they can trust themselves, they don't know whether they have the intuition and the ability to kind of listen to their hunger cues, that's when I kind of apply a little bit of pushback and challenge that narrative, because, that's a fear-based behavior. It's not one that's, optional or decision. They're not making that decision necessarily for the right reasons. It's out of concern for, not being able to do something instinctually. So, there's definitely a time and a place for macro tracking.
Yeah, nice one, Holly. And so just to finish up, I'm really mindful of your time. You seem to have a lot going on in your business as well, the Be a Body research, or Be a Brain, I'm sorry, research summaries that come out every month.
Research review?
Yes, research review. There you go. I mean, what a great resource. And you're involved in actually conducting some of these studies and writing. Like, haven't you just published like some papers over the last couple of years as well, Holly?
Yeah, so I've been involved in 3 different papers over the last 12 months. One of them was in training volume, so just looking at differences in volume and how that affects hypertrophy outcomes. But the most recent paper was an investigation kind of reviewing the literature on lengthened partials and, its superiority perhaps, for muscle growth adaptations. So I'd love to say I'm a full-time researcher, but that's an entire career in and of itself. I'm very fortunate to be, dating somebody that is a full-time researcher, and his knowledge on this subject just blows me away. So I'm very lucky to have him. But yes, I have been involved in a couple of studies, and it's changed my perception of how I used to train, and has been really eye-opening also as somebody that is, I would say, I'm on the social media, like evidence-based social media side of the fence. Listening to the perspectives of actual researchers, there is a lot of conflicting information and opinions between these two spaces. So I think on social media, there is, people will perceive certain individuals as the experts. They're evidence-based, coaches. But when you then step over to the researchers, the people that are publishing and have hundreds of studies in, specific areas, they disagree by quite a lot, and they're almost being silenced on social media for having a different opinion. So that has been quite an unfortunate, experience for me to see that, but it awared me of what was kind of going on, and it's meant, or at least for me, it's led me to be a lot more cautious in what I say and, what I put out on social media. I'm unfortunately, or maybe this is a good thing, I think it's made me a lot more mindful of just how, what I say, and I won't just put anything up unless I can get behind it. Whereas previously, the younger version of myself is perhaps a little bit more careless and less cautious, not thinking about the potential consequences that it can have on an individual's life. I've definitely become a lot more, mindful of what I say and do, which it's a high standard to operate at, but I mean, I wouldn't change it. I think it's just led me to become a better coach, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, and that's certainly evident when we see you out there, Holly. Thank you so much for your time this morning, your afternoon. I really appreciate it, and for all that you do. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how things change for you over the next year or so, and how you just continue to develop. It's awesome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate the time being on here today.
Alrighty, hopefully you enjoyed that. It was a real delight to chat to Holly after following her for a number of years now. Next week on the podcast, I speak to my mate Grant Schofield as we head into 2025. So we just get the lowdown on where Grant's at, what he's thinking, and of course, we always love a great discussion about those practical life strategies to move you into 2025, although we did record this interview a month or so ago. That'll be next week. And also, do not forget that I have a sale on my fixed term meal plans, 50% off using the code XMIS50 right through to New Year's Eve. So you can start 2025 the way that you mean to go on. All right, team. You have the best rest of your festive week and catch you next week.